Mention Jane Austen's name, and most people have an opinion about her life and work, regardless of whether or not they've read any of her novels. The common image is that of an English gentlewoman dressed in a high-waisted frock with puffy sleeves. Generally speaking, her characters are better known than she is, and the available facts suggest that she didn't do much, didn't live long, and only wrote 6 books. So what is it about her work that has stood the test of time? She certainly painted a picture of the nicer side of well-to-do life in the late 18th century, but so did many other novelists, poets, and painters of the time. Jane Austen had something special, which has kept her books on bestseller lists worldwide some 200 years after they were written. Her style is crisp, bright and witty, and her ability to capture the attention of the reader in the first few lines is never more evident than in the opening of Pride and Prejudice. It is as funny and inviting to today's reader as it was to Jane Austen herself when she wrote it.
It is a truth, universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his entering a neighbourhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.
In this film, we will travel to the places that Jane Austen visited. We will look at the places where she lived, and using her books and letters, we will try to unravel the mystery that has become the Jane Austen phenomenon. Before we go any further, though, here's a whirlwind look at Jane Austen's life and an even speedier journey through her novels. Jane Austen was born on the 16th of December 1775 in the rectory at Steventon, Hampshire. She was the 7th child of the Reverend George Austen and his wife Cassandra, following 5 brothers and 1 sister. It was a comfortable upbringing, with the family remaining at Steventon until the Reverend George Austen's retirement in 1801, when they moved to Bath. After George Austen's death, Jane moved with her mother and sister to Southampton. In 1809, Chawton Cottage was put at their disposal by Jane's brother Edward. Here they lived very happily until early in 1816, when Jane's health began to fail. The cause was Addison's disease, and within the year she was virtually an invalid. In May 1817, she became gravely ill and was taken to Winchester for better medical care. Here she died, aged just 41, on the 18th of July, 1817, and was buried in Winchester Cathedral. There are 6 novels, 4 of them published during Jane's lifetime, and 2 of them posthumously in 1818. Sense and Sensibility was the first to be published in 1811. It is the story of 2 sisters, Marianne, an incurable romantic, and Eleanor, known for her good sense and self-control. The plot is basically concerned with their efforts to find the suitable husbands, avoiding the unprincipled and weak young men for which the Regency period was famous. This was followed by perhaps Jane Austen's best-known work, Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth, our heroine, is bright and intelligent, and refuses to marry a suitable man, whom she considers to be an idiot. She then refuses to marry our hero, Mr. Darcy, because his pride causes her offence. Then, against a background of some of the funniest characters in English literature, Elizabeth finds that she has been mistaken, and that our handsome, rich Darcy is a good man underneath his proud exterior. She then falls in love with him and makes an advantageous marriage. Mansfield Park, published in 1814, is full of contrasting country house and bustling naval town imagery. Fanny Price, our heroine, is famous for her goodness, whether due to strength or fear, only outdone by George Eliot's Dorothea in Middlemarch. Our hero, Edmund Bertram, is rather pompous. In fact, Somerset Maugham, who was quite a fan of Mansfield Park, said of them, "I recognise that its heroine is a little prig, and its hero a pompous arse, but I don't care." Despite the course of true love running as unsmoothly as you would expect, the couple end up marrying and live happily ever after. The either loved or hated Emma followed in 1816. Emma, a rather spoilt, doted-upon daughter, misuses her obvious intelligence to meddle in finding suitable marriages for all those around her with disastrous consequences. She learns the error of her ways and marries a sensible older man who will help her to use her intelligence in a more profitable way. The two books published after her death are a complete contrast to each other. Northanger Abbey was the first Jane Austen novel to be taken for publication. It tells the story of Catherine Morland, her obsession with Gothic novels, her exploits in Bath, and her eventual marriage to the sensible hero Henry Tilney. Persuasion, by contrast, is her last completed novel. Her style is altogether more gentle, and our heroine, Anne Elliot, is an older, quieter type of girl who makes the mistake of turning down a very decent man, Captain Wentworth, on the advice of a friend. Through the course of the novel, she continues to love Wentworth. Eventually, he discovers this and renews his offer of marriage, and all's well that ends well. So there you have it. A high-speed resume of the life and times of Jane Austen. Now we can slow the pace a little and take a careful look at the England Jane Austen lived in and wrote about, giving the opportunity to discover what it is about Jane Austen and her novels that has won such an affectionately held place in English literature. This is Steventon in Hampshire, where Jane Austen began her life just 9 days before Christmas in 1775. It was a comfortable household, but no doubt rather a busy one, as Jane was the 7th child. There were 5 older brothers and 1 sister, with James being the eldest, born in 1765. He would eventually take over from his father as rector of Steventon. George was born in 1766, though there is little mention of him, as he suffered from mental illness, which prevented him from living with the family. Edward was born in 1767, becoming the wealthiest member of the family, having been adopted by his father's cousin, Thomas Knight of Godmersham. In 1771, Henry was born. In his younger days, he was quite an entrepreneur, though unfortunately he became bankrupt in 1816. He then entered the church, and was also rector of Steventon for a short while. Mrs. Austen must have been delighted that her 5th child was a daughter. Cassandra was born in 1773, and would be a lifelong companion to both her mother and to Jane. In 1774, Francis was born, the first of the seafaring Austens. His success was great, with his promotion to the Admiral of the Fleet coming in 1863. Then, of course, we have Jane's birth in 1775, with Charles, the baby of the family, born in 1779. Charles was the other naval member of the family, rising to the rank of Rear Admiral in 1846. We can only imagine what a houseful the Austen family would have been as the rectory was demolished in 1828, though this sketch by Jane's niece Anna may help to give a general idea. When you bear in mind also that there would have been servants as well, not to mention the pupils who came to be educated by the Reverend George Austen, life must have been a little hectic. Was Jane's description of a noisy household in Mansfield Park based on memories of the Steventon rectory?
The doors were in constant banging, the stairs were never at rest, nothing was done without a clatter, nobody sat still, and nobody could command attention when they spoke.
One of the best-known sources of material about Jane's life is a memoir by her nephew James Austen Leigh, which was published in 1870. As we look at present-day Steventon, his description of the rectory will help to bring back to life the home which proved to be such a strong influence on Jane and her writing. The house itself stood in a shallow valley, surrounded by sloping meadows, well sprinkled with elm trees, at the end of a small village of cottages, each well provided with a garden. It was sufficiently commodious to hold pupils in addition to the growing family, and was considered to be above average of parsonages, but the rooms were furnished with less elegance than would now be found in most ordinary dwellings. No cornice marked the juncture of wall and ceiling, while beams which supported the upper floors projected into the rooms below in all naked simplicity, covered only by a coat of paint or whitewash. On the south side, the ground rose gently and was occupied by one of those old-fashioned gardens in which vegetables and flowers are combined, flanked and protected on the east by one of the thatched mud walls common in that country and overshadowed by 5 elms. It must have been an idyllic place to grow up for 2 imaginative little girls like Jane and Cassandra, who became inseparable from a very early age. Jane went to school in Oxford when she was only 7. This was possible because Cassandra was going, and the determined little Jane did not want to be left behind. Mrs. Austen said of them,
"If Cassandra was going to have her head cut off, Jane would insist on sharing her fate."
Both girls were brought home from school due to an epidemic of putrid fever, which was typhus. Jane was very ill, and the family feared for her life. Jane pulled through, but the aunt who had gone to bring them home had died of the fever. The girls then went to the Abbey School in Reading. It was kept by Mrs. Latournelle, whose love of the theatricals obviously influenced the Austens' treasured family pastime of performing plays. We often see this influence crop up in the novels, Mansfield Park in particular. Cassandra and Jane returned to Steventon in 1785 and continued their education with the Reverend George Austen and their brothers. This is a good point at which to break off from Jane Austen's own story to look at references to Steventon in her writing, and also Jane's own images of childhood. Pride and Prejudice has some very realistic descriptions of a parsonage, a church, and a grand house at Rosings Park, the home of Lady Catherine